My guest today is Japna Sethi. Japna leads our growth team here at Productboard. She's our group product manager on that side. And she's been at the forefront of driving growth at leading technology companies like Dropbox, and has also been an active investor in cutting-edge products, including Carta and Heads Up. She has a diverse set of product experiences ranging from growth, mobile, productivity and collaboration, health and hardware. Wow, done it all, covered every industry, and is definitely one of my favorite people here on the product team here at Productboard. I'm really excited to have her sharing some of her experiences about product-led growth and how we tackle that. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Japna, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Scott. What a wonderful intro. Really appreciate that. Love to be one of your favorite people. You're one of my favorite people as well. And good morning or good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. To all of you, thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Give me a moment here. All right, Scott, can you give me confirmation I'm sharing the right thing?
You're good.
All right, perfect. All right, so as Scott mentioned, I'm here to chat with you today about growth and a little bit of what how I'd like to set up the session. Scott gave a wonderful introduction to me, but I'll add a couple more details about myself so you know who you're talking to. That's about growth in general, putting Productboard aside. What is product-led growth? What does it even mean? And then I'll talk to you a little bit more about specifically how that looks like at Productboard and how we've implemented it thus far and what we're thinking. And then I'll open it up to AMA. Feel free to, as Scott mentioned, use the Q&A to submit your questions. So as Scott mentioned, I am currently leading the growth team at Productboard. Before that, I worked on the product growth team basically across the entire organization at Dropbox, helped with the IPO and continued growth post-IPO. And then I've had a couple of stints across product and growth and a bunch of other roles at previous companies with very different types of products, as Scott mentioned. One thing, even though I do live in San Francisco, you may not know about me, is that I'm actually native to the Bay Area. So if you are in the Bay Area, hello. I'm currently also dialing out of San Francisco as well, but Productboard is very much a global company. We're working with folks across multiple different geographic locations, and a little bit of fun about me. I'm a human just as much as the rest of you, but as Scott mentioned, I like to dabble in investing from time to time. I really enjoy working with very small companies, small teams, founders, just working on tough problems. It's very much a very interesting intellectual game. San Francisco is a very hilly place. I do a lot of hiking, walking, outdoor activity. And then, had a bit of a pause in terms of traveling during the pandemic, but picking that up now. Recently, just Scott and I were chatting about a Europe trip, and travel within the United States has opened up. So it's safe to travel depending on the location. It's really fun to be able to meet friends, family, and make new friends. And then I also, as mentioned, I live in San Francisco, so I'm lucky to live near some wonderful, wonderful wine regions, and I'm very privileged to be able to have access to some of these things. And so one of the other things my family and friends do is taste and collect wine. So if you have any questions about any fun activities, I'm here as well. But with that, that's a bit about me, who I am as a human being in both the career and personal world. So let's get on to the agenda at hand. What is growth? It's very much a loaded term. It's used all across the interwebs to mean a bunch of different things. Everyone kind of has their own little spin to how they define it. And it can be confusing to really parse through all of that information. So happy to share with you my definition personally and how I think about growth philosophically. So at a high level, product-led growth is a type of go-to-market distribution motion. And it puts the product at really the forefront of a prospect's evaluation and sales experience. And it really is spans across the entire user journey, not just at the evaluation point, but also at the purchase point and beyond, in terms of how you use the product post-purchase, how you use it as a team. And folks compare this to a sales-led growth motion, for example. It's a different type of go-to-market distribution motion, where you may be employing a sales team, you may be employing SDRs or AEs, folks of that nature, to be taking people through demos and POCs, and really having a heavy human experience in your sales experience. So those are kind of the two different go-to-market motions that we're talking about. And what does PLG actually look like if practiced at a company? I like to say that there are different methodologies or manifestations of PLG. And generally speaking, they fall into the three buckets listed here. Free trial, folks know what that is. You have a limited time to try a product without paying for it. A freemium experience where you have a lot of time, maximum amount of time, unless that product gets shut down, but you have limitations to the product experience that you get to try for free. And then virality, another kind of loaded term, but essentially very high level philosophical way of looking at it is to leverage your existing user base to bring in more people into your ecosystem. Folks might say, we're a PLG company, that's a PLG company, that's not a PLG company, but usually a company might be manifesting all three or just one of the three to help be more product-led over time. I mentioned that, sometimes products or companies like to claim themselves or other products and companies as being PLG or not PLG. And as I mentioned, the three different general methodologies or buckets, if you will, you don't need to do all three, or you can do all three. It really depends on what type of product you have, how complex it is, what is your target market, what is your business model that is right for your product and company. And that market could also change over time, and your business model could change over time, depending on how mature the market is, or how many competitors there are in the market, or how established it is. So there's a lot of factors, and it's kind of hard, in my opinion, to really think about product-led growth and sales-led growth as a binary thing. If you're A, you're B. If you're or if you're not A, you're B. If you're not B, you're A. I actually think of it as a spectrum. So if you kind of go back in time and think about physics, like you have a seesaw, or basically a fulcrum and a spectrum on top, where depending on all of those factors I mentioned, you may be more product-led, you may be more sales-led. It's really not a black and white kind of binary definition people like to talk about on the web. It's really actually more nuanced. And I like to say to my team at Productboard, and I like to say to other people who are trying to figure out how to be product-led or trying to figure out who they are, that it's a spectrum. And when you're growing your product, your company, etc., you're trying to basically find out your identity. Where do you land on this spectrum, and how that changes over time? So really think about it as a balance, because both motions are very much valid and wonderful motions that can really help your business. And I also mentioned a little bit earlier about how you can actually use product-led strategies and methodologies across the entire user journey, not just at the acquisition point. So I've mapped out here basically a very high level of funnel, what I call monetization user journey. And it can look a little bit different here and there depending on, again, the product, your go-to-market motion, but this is very similar to how we operate here at Productboard. So of course you have your various different acquisition channels. If you have a thriving sales motion, you may have demo requests on your website that people come in and ask for demos. We use the free trial methodology as one of the PLG manifestations. So many of the folks who are acquired into our ecosystem start trials. And then the next step is to activate those users, convert them, help them get set up for success in order to be ongoing healthy users, ongoing engaged users, retain them over time, and then hopefully expand them. And it's not drawn here, but the product-led expansion opportunities can really help acquire more people into the ecosystem and turn this entire funnel into a flywheel and kind of connect back to the beginning. So that's kind of high level how it works. And then you'll notice these pink or fuchsia lines in between where the self-serve and the sales serve motion really meet, because they can help kind of reroute people to where they need to be based on how much, I call it touch in this slide, but human assistance is needed in order to serve their use case, to serve their needs as an individual customer. So there's boundaries between these two. And sometimes for folks who are a little bit more technical, I say it's an API, and you have to figure out the API, you have to figure out those boundaries and how both go-to-market motions complement each other. You may be wondering, all right, how does Productboard do it? Good question. So very similar to how I mentioned, I'm a human behind the Zoom box. My growth team is also made up of a bunch of humans, smiling, lovely, attractive faces here. We like to have fun. We like to give back to the community and generally just connect with one another. We care very deeply about the work that we're doing at Productboard. I just wanted to give you a little taste of how our team operates. So the charter for our team is to ensure our solutions intuitively communicate the value of Productboard at every step of the customer journey, ensuring prospects and customers can get up and running once they start using the Productboard. And we're responsible for the discovery journey at the very beginning to help with a prospect's evaluation. Again, that API between self-serve and sales-serve, as well as a superior trial experience and the trial mechanics and activation experiences for anyone that's trialing the product. A great onboarding experience for those same folks as well, and for new users who convert. Customer expansion motions, I mentioned this as well, helping to kind of turn that funnel into a flywheel. Again, another key area that's an API between your sales and self-serve go-to-market motions. And then, of course, monetization strategies via pricing and packaging. The other thing I like to tell my team is, even though we are made of engineers, product managers, and product designers, we are a go-to-market team. I do this because I want people to really feel that charter very deeply, that mission I mentioned, and work with the other go-to-market teams that we sit alongside to provide a very clear and crisp integrated customer experience. We are the EPD arm of the rest of go-to-market. And we help bridge the gap between our go-to-market teams like marketing, sales, and success, and our EPD teams. So this is a bit of, again, the very high-level user journey and how our current go-to-market teams are currently staffed to support different areas of the user journey. Note, I have an empty pill here, mostly because, of course, as a growing company, staffing and resourcing is always a constraint. And so we have to be ruthless in terms of what parts of the user journey we're prioritizing strategically at any given time. And those are, specific to the needs of the business at the time. So right now we've got a partner team between marketing and EPD on website and acquisition. We've got a trial activation and conversion team, and we've got a monetization team. A lot of folks ask me what are the hardest parts or the challenges of working in growth. And to be honest, this is not at all a comprehensive list. It's what I happen to remember and experience when creating these slides and preparing for today's talk. But I'm sure that I will think of more later. But just to kind of give you a sense of some of the day-to-day, week-to-week, etc. kind of challenges, there's a bunch that we are facing. So first one is balancing self-serve and self-serve goals. I've alluded to this many times, and I've shown you guys some of the charts here, but really clearly defining that API between how the both go-to-market motions really complement each other. And here's one example I've written down is, there are metric goals associated with both. So for self-serve, for example, you may want to optimize for overall volume in your funnel, and for self-serve, you may want to optimize for qualified pipeline. And those are different. Those are very different optimization techniques that you would need to do, especially in the acquisition side. Rapid experimentation versus big bets. I'm sure, again, a lot of you have read about growth on the interwebs and trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? Is it beneficial for us? And rapid experimentation is one of the kind of tenets that you'll read about. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for, let's move back. You're responsible for all of these things, and with a growing team, even potentially much more than this. And so you also have to be able to balance big bets and kind of invest in larger projects that you think are going to drive step change in growth. Rapid experimentation can help optimize and help you learn and get more validated feedback from the market, but driving step function change in growth requires big bet thinking. So it's not always about running A/B tests. The third one I'll mention is championing the growth mindset and helping to advocate for the growth mindset across other teams. So that includes your partner teams on marketing, sales, customer success, any other partner teams that you may have. And it also includes the rest of the EPD organization. Sometimes, in growth, you're responsible for the holistic customer experience. You're responsible for kind of driving eyeballs or attention to what you think is the most important feature to activate on, or the most important action for users to take. And the individual product teams may, be invested in their specific surface area or their specific domain area, and those can conflict sometimes. So you have to also be able to teach the tools of adoption and activation to others as well, so that they can try a little bit on their own. You're still responsible for the holistic customer experience. Being data informed versus data driven. Lots of folks talk about data driven decision making on the interwebs as well. And as I mentioned, that's very much a mode of rapidly experimenting to the point where you are not necessarily marrying the quant and qual to create or synthesize strategic conclusions and then make decisions off of that, which is more data informed, but you're just running experiments for the sake of running experiments, And sometimes even people use experimentation as a way to resolve conflict instead of actual critical thinking and strategic decision making. And so don't be data driven, be data informed. And then lastly, as I mentioned, not comprehensive, but one of the other things that I want to mention is approach to evolving pricing and packaging. This is one of the big bets that you have to think about. I mentioned in the second bullet that this is something that you never get perfect right away. You have to keep evolving it over time. This generally you see companies, at least in the growth stage, evolve their pricing and packaging every 1.5 to 2 years. And even within those, there are smaller tweaks and adjustments. And those are not things that you can A/B test easily. So those are, again, being data informed, but also really understanding and listening to your market, the competition, the broader industry, how your go-to-market motion is working, what are the unit economics, and how to stay competitive. So these are some challenges that we experience on growth with our partner EPD and go-to-market teams. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Let's open this up for a little bit. I think we've got a couple here to start with, and I'll start with those. And I've got a whole bunch of mine too that I'd love to ask a little bit, but I'll start with one from Jordan here. In the enterprise B2B SaaS world, is there a real option to do PLG? You generally need a sophisticated sales force to sell into enterprise scale orgs.
That is a great question. And again, I think Productboard is in an interesting space because our product is quite complex. It does take human assistance in order to understand our platform product. So we do have, we do have the free trial method that we've employed for quite a while. That's been honestly actually our largest source of product qualified leads. And so we accept folks into a trial, we activate them on certain key features and use cases. And depending on, firmographic and other types of data, we will qualify them and send them, route them to the sales team, give them some information about those use cases, and then they can facilitate a larger deal and a better understanding of the entire enterprise software. In addition to the free trial, we also, again, explore pricing and packaging. So, are there entry-level packages that we can offer that aren't as complex and can be more easily understood by kind of, smaller teams or single player use cases that can help increase our brand, increase top of funnel, and in the long term generate more leads for our team once those folks mature and use the product more. There's certainly quite a lot of PLG methodologies you can use, and kind of goes back to that spectrum, the seesaw that I mentioned about how much you really play on the other side versus how much you are totally 100% bought in on one go-to-market motion.
I know one of the things, Japna, that we've got is the ability to really play with those enterprise features on the free trial. How much has that motion kind of helped people get a sense of and be more or less bought into that enterprise motion in some place later on?
So I would say there are like two generally different buckets for the enterprise motion. There's the individual or small team within an enterprise that is feeling the pain and looking for a solution and a point use case. And they're not the type of folks to, go through kind of the IT team or a CIO or a CPO. They're just, out there on Google searching for things that could help and talking to their friends in their network. And those are the types of folks that will come into the trial and try things out. And then there are the, leaders or a little bit top-down motion where they're saying, hey, I need something for my organization. And that's kind of the motion that is, let's say, really purely enterprise SaaS, where they want to talk to a salesperson right away, do a long demo, do a POC, do something that's very specific to their organization. So those are two different motions. They're both enterprise companies in terms of that potential customer. And the former can enter the trial, experience the product, and they can always either convert on their own or get other teams or leaders to be involved in the process. And that's where I mentioned that API between the go-to-market motions, two go-to-market motions really complement one another.
That's good. Question here from Jack D. What's the approximate head count of the teams you're mentioning that you've got today?
On the acquisition side, just our partner team with marketing, there are about 3 to 4 different folks on web development as well as program management. We use WordPress on that side, so that's a partner team. And then we have an activation team that's about 6 people. We have a kind of normal squad structure: 1 product manager, 1 product designer, and a couple engineers, between 4 and 5 engineers. And then we have our monetization, pricing, and packaging team, very similar: 1 product manager, 1 product designer, and a squad of about 4 to 5 engineers. We have a couple more folks coming to join the team. And then we have my counterparts in both engineering and design also helping to lead the teams.
Yep. Question here for Dylan Munn. How do you suggest a team approaches PLG with an industry that requires a large amount of data pulls from government and older systems that do not have APIs or software solutions?
I'm reading this again.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm understanding this question as you are a company that provides software or services, and your target customer is in the industry that is, in the government or similar. That one is really hard because your target market seems really niche and hard to acquire via kind of broader channels like paid search or organic traffic or things of that nature. That seems like perhaps, and I may be misunderstanding, so you can clarify, that your acquisition strategy is a little bit more outbound or partner oriented, in which case, the methodologies that I mentioned, like free trial or freemium or virality, don't really come into play because volume isn't what you're using to kind of as a main lever to impact your overall funnel and unit economics of your funnel. But you may employ some other types of methodologies, like for example, there's some products that have open demos on their website where you can kind of just sign up and look at like a built out space or a built out product, a vision of the art of the possible if you engaged with that company or service, for example. So there are some creative ways to go about really putting the product at the forefront of your evaluation experience for prospects.
Great, thank you. Maybe we'll wait for some other questions to come in here. I've got a couple that maybe you want to ask. I guess what I'm really curious about is there's lots of what I might describe as like led motions today in product. There's even a new one called community led, which puts community at the center of all of this. I mean, it seems almost every team could be put at the center of this at some motion, and somebody can write up something on the internet and talk about it. But really, ultimately, when an organization's trying to pick its path through the available motion options that are there, how do they make that choice? Like, how do they best get to the conclusion? Should we be sales led, product led, community led, whatever else led at some point down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really good question. I mentioned this. We'll go back to this slide if it works. And Scott, to your point, right? This is there's 2 options here, and with new motions like community led coming in, there's multiple options. There's multiple dimensions, and so this picture very much becomes obsolete quickly. But The idea and the underlying principle is still the same. One, I think just generally, when you're very small and starting out, you want to look at the product value that you're offering, making sure that you're nailing that use case, and it's clearly a painful enough product or problem that a customer has that are willing to pay for it. Once that's really nailed, people talk about product market fit and product market channel fit. So you have to really evaluate how large your target market really is that's going to pay for this solution. What else is in the market? What are your alternatives or competitors? What are the incumbents? How do they take their products to market? Where could you possibly reach these folks? Is it through partnerships? Because is it outbound? These are government people you need to talk to directly, or can they be found on Facebook? There's so many different ways to acquire people, and you really need to understand where they live and meet them where they are. And those are some key indicators to figure out what are your levers and where you should start in terms of building a go-to-market motion that matches not only your product, but your target market that you are going to start with. And you may also change over time. You may introduce new use cases or new product value, and that may change how you take things to market. And then secondly, I just add, Scott, you asked about how do you even start? Just experiment. Put something out there, put something live out there in the world, get feedback from real users, get numbers and metrics, and just experiment. Because a lot of folks put a lot of pressure on getting it right or perfect in the first time, and there's just no one in the world who's gotten it right or perfect in the first time. And I can't even count on my 10 fingers anymore the amount of times I've been in companies or worked on products where we've changed quite a bit about how we take things to market or how we price and package. So it's really more fluid than you think. And all you have to do is just start somewhere.
Yep. What books or resources do you recommend for those that want to learn more about PLG? That's another question here from Michelle.
That's a great question. There's a lot out there. I like to read OpenView's blog articles. I subscribe to their blog articles. They do great interviews with other companies that are product led. They also do they publish a lot of very interesting reports about public product led companies, how they've grown over time, etc. Andrew Chen, who worked on growth at Uber, for example, wrote a book called The Cold Start Problem. It's more around network effects specifically, but really, really great insights in there as well. Also just fun stories from his time. And then there's a couple other VC firms that have different verticals that they study even beyond OpenView, where they talk about PLG in specific industries. Which is interesting if you are, not necessarily a consumer app, for example. And then generally, I like to just join some communities. Reforge is a great community. There's a lot of great minds in there. There's a lot of great content in there. There's a couple other communities that are popping up. I'm just looking at my Slack now. Product led is another one. Those are just great resources to talk to people. I find that sometimes blogs or articles can be very frou-frou, and they don't tell you the dirty things and the painful things of what it's like to work in growth. And so connecting with people directly, kind of asking honest and intimate questions like, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Gets some of the most honest answers from other folks and makes you feel a lot less alone. So those are some resources just off the top of my head.
Yep, no, that's great. One question maybe that I've got on this side would be really interesting to understand is how do you balance the change that a growth team's doing with the overlap and ownership maybe of areas that are held by a traditional product team? And I think what I've seen actually in some motions here is when teams bring in a growth team or establish that growth function for the very first time, that there ends up being a little bit of like a turf war almost between experimentation and the product that's there, and who goes first and who has the right to impact maybe the other areas part of the work. So I think if I relate this back to your stuff, maybe it's like maybe a change inside Productboard to the onboarding experience has a direct and specific impact, maybe say on our features board or on our, insights board or any of those kinds of parts, the different parts of the product that are out there. So how do you balance that? How do you work through that? I guess that messy middle or messy relationship sometimes that the teams have on that side.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of conversations back and forth about who owns what and what makes more sense for each other's goals. And, what is the preference for how to go about putting together a customer experience. Where we're at now in terms of how we're currently staffed, I mentioned where our teams are more focused on top of funnel. We have a very clear ownership over the new user experience. So whatever overlays we want to do, whatever differences we want to do, the core product team owns kind of the customer experience when someone is kind of quote unquote finished with their onboarding or activated, and they own long-term engagement and retention. And so one of the things that has facilitated and really helps to drive and guide these conversations to a clear decision is having clear goals. And those clear goals have both like the qualitative objective and the metrics that you're trying to drive. So if there's any creative, wonderful idea that's going to help with your goal or your metric, you should have the freedom to experiment and put something out there to see if it helps. And basically, I mentioned the challenge of championing and advocating for the growth mindset. That's one of the things that we often talk about when we have these discussions is, hey, this is not forever. This is an experiment. This may be ripped out of the code. This may stay forever. We maybe will change it. It could benefit you this way and that way. And so that's how we generally frame things. And if teams have clear goals and clear charters, these discussions are a lot easier. If your teams don't have clear goals or charters or separation areas, then it becomes life full of conflict. So that's how I'd generally recommend having those conversations. And then lastly, again, very similar to my previous comment, boundaries for teams change just as your product changes over time. I've been through many large reorgs and also small negotiations between teams about domains. And honestly, when you're at a growing company, there's only so much impactful work. Sorry, I meant to say there is so much impactful work that it doesn't really become conflict. I'm kind of asking other people to please come help because I want to deliver customer impact and value as fast as possible. And I'm not able to do all of the ambitious things I want to do with just my team. So leveraging your partners to help can be a wonderful way to go about that.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. A question here from Claudia, with lots of interesting no-code tools popping up, things like Can-Do, Switchboard, etc. Beyond just pop-ups and tool tips, do you think PLG teams can successfully become less engineering heavy?
That is a great question. Actually, Switchboard, interesting history. One of the co-founders used to work at Productboard, and I used to work with him. And then one of the other co-founders used to work at Dropbox, and I used to work with him as well. So it's a small world. Generally, I think high level answer is yes. I think we can certainly become less engineering heavy. At the end of the day, these are platform tools. And so you have to have an already established growth team to be able to invest in a growth platform tool, like a library of components you want to use. You kind of have to already have some conviction about what patterns you want to be using in your onboarding, what works well, things of that nature. So laying out the foundation is something your growth engineering team will still have to do. One example, very tactical, is we use coach marks in our product. You can see them, if you sign up for a trial today, you can see how we use that in our product. And sure, we can tweak content and placement and design here and there, but generally the pattern is well established, and we know how to use them effectively. So that can be, that's something we've learned over time. And that can be something we can componentize and put in the library. And we can use products like Switchboard to manage that so that engineering doesn't have to go tweak the copy every single time. But for other things like bigger bets or bigger patterns or bigger changes, especially things like pricing and packaging, but even for us in onboarding, we're changing up our home surface. That still requires engineering. I think instead of thinking about engineering heavy, I'm thinking about tools like that can give the team more leverage so that we can focus our engineers on the biggest bets and still maintain small bet experiments and optimizations using low or no code tools.
Great. That's a really good answer. Maybe one last question, unless anybody else asks something here. It's like, how do you use Productboard? Particularly as a product growth team, how do you manage essentially the experiments and the execution and the objectives and all the work that you do day to day? Like, how does Productboard show up in that as a growth team?
Yeah, I just realized I've been sharing my random screen. Great question. So to be honest, we use Productboard very much like how any other product team would use, product development team would use Productboard. We have objectives and goals, as I mentioned earlier, just the same as any other team. We have clearly defined areas of ownership between us and other teams. We have initiatives that nestle under those objectives. We have a nested hierarchy as well. We group themes, we group features and new ideas under thematic components and user needs we want to solve. We also have surface areas, things that we just own that needs to be, upkeep, a lot of like platform and billing work. So very, very similar to how other product teams use Productboard. In terms of experimentation, it's a little bit different. We run more A/B experiments in the product than perhaps a core product team would. We simply have statuses that our team just uses. So we have a status for running experiment, and we have a status for GAing the experiment, GAing general availability. Yep. So those are some things that we do slightly differently, but other than that, I would say 90-95% of the operation in Productboard is the same.
Yeah, well, that's really great. That's really great. Thanks so much. I really, really appreciate you just, again, like taking the time to share a little bit about how you're doing the work that you do, and your experience as well with PLG and the whole overall motion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I hope you found it interesting as well to get out and share some of that today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the wonderful questions, both from you, Scott, as well as folks in the audience. And I'll be around in the community if anyone watches this and has other questions as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just to maybe wrap things up, I'm just going to share a screen here quickly. I just shared a link out for our post-event feedback survey. Do ask that people take the time, if you can, to share feedback. I'm sure Japna would love to hear how the event went, things that we could do better on our side. We're always trying to learn. These are very much experiments for us as a community team, and your feedback does matter on that side. And you got a chance to win one of our monthly prizes as well on that side. I'd ask you to continue this conversation. If there's other things you want to know about, things you want to ask, feel free to ask a question inside our community. Japna, as she mentioned, is there, and we'd be happy to bring her in and have her answer any questions that you have on that side. We've got a few events as well coming up over the next few weeks. Christian Crumlish is coming in on June 16th to talk about the relationship between UX design and product management. We have Klaus Torns, also from our Productboard product team, talking about democratizing prioritization. And lastly, we'll be ending the month of June with Nicholas Jametta talking about mental health and that being a priority within product overall. Lots of other ways as well you can get involved in our community, whether it be attending our monthly roundtables, joining our Meet a Maker program where we match people one-to-one for 30-minute meetings, or get involved here as a speaker. If you've got something that you want to share about your experiences, your knowledge, we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you put up your hand and share your experiences. Again, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Japna, again, for getting involved. And we look forward to seeing you back at our next event.